The radio operator sent one final transmission before he died. Not a position. Not a request for assistance. A description. All officers including the captain are dead, lying in the chart room and on the bridge. Possibly whole crew dead. There was a pause. Then, in Morse code, 2 words. I die. The signal went silent. Whatever was on that ship, whatever had moved through it in the hours before the American vessels arrived, had already finished its work. When the boarding party climbed the hull of the SS Ourang Medan and stepped onto the deck, they found a ship that was perfectly intact. No damage to the hull. No signs of collision. No storm damage. No fire. No structural failure of any kind. And on every surface where a human being could lie, there was a body. The faces were the detail that would not leave the men who saw them. Frozen in an expression that no pathologist would later be able to formally classify. Arms extended toward something the boarding party could not see. Eyes open. Mouths open. As if whatever had passed through that ship had not simply killed them, but shown them something in the moment of dying that they had not been able to look away from. The ship exploded before it could be towed to port. The wreck was never found. The official record, where it exists at all, is thin enough to suggest that someone decided it should be. In February 1947, the Strait of Malacca was among the busiest shipping lanes in the world. What passed through one of its vessels that month has not been explained. The Strait of Malacca has been the throat of maritime Asia for 4 centuries. A narrow channel of water between the Malay Peninsula to the north and the island of Sumatra to the south, it is the shortest route between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea, and in the years following the Second World War it carried the commercial traffic of a region attempting to rebuild itself. The port cities that line its edges, Penang, Malacca, Singapore, had all been occupied by Japanese forces during the war. By 1947, the Japanese withdrawal was 2 years complete, and the European colonial powers were reasserting their presence in the region even as the first tremors of independence movements made themselves felt. Ships moved through these waters carrying rubber, tin, palm oil, and goods whose manifests were not always filed accurately. The post-war years in Southeast Asia were years of commercial opportunism, bureaucratic chaos, and irregular trade. Some of what moved through the Strait of Malacca in 1947 did not appear in any registry. The SS Ourang Medan was a Dutch-registered freighter. Her tonnage was modest, her route unremarkable, the kind of vessel that carried cargo from port to port without attracting attention. Her crew complement was approximately 23 men, though the surviving records do not confirm this precisely. Her captain's name has not been preserved in any account considered reliable. The ship itself appears in some Dutch maritime registries and not in others. This is not unusual in itself. Record-keeping in the immediate post-war period was imperfect. Ships were transferred, renamed, reflagged with speed that outpaced administrative process. But the gaps in the Ourang Medan's history are denser than average, and they cluster around the question of what she was carrying on her final voyage. 2 American vessels received the distress signal on a February morning in 1947. The Silver Star and the City of Baltimore were both operating in the region when their radio operators picked up the Morse transmission. The signal was traced to a position in the strait itself, and the Silver Star, closer to the coordinates, altered course to respond. What they found when they arrived was a ship that showed no distress. The Ourang Medan sat in calm water. There was no smoke. No visible damage. No debris field. No crew at the rail calling for help. The boarding party was called back before they crossed the deck the first time, to confirm what they thought they were seeing. They were seeing it correctly. The dead were everywhere. The captain was in the chart room. The officers were on the bridge. The radio operator, the man whose final transmission had brought the Silver Star here, was still at his station, his hand on the telegraph key, his face tilted slightly upward. Every member of the crew had been found in or near their post, which indicated that whatever killed them had not given them time to flee. Or had not needed to. The investigation began immediately. The Silver Star's doctor examined the bodies. There were no wounds. No lacerations, no bruising, no signs of physical violence. No signs of illness, no vomiting, no hemorrhage, no visible evidence of infectious disease. No signs of asphyxiation in the conventional sense. The ship's food stores were not spoiled. The water supply was not contaminated. The bodies were not decomposed. Given the heat of the region, this was noted as strange. They should have begun decomposing. They had not. The expressions were the detail that would prove most durable in the accounts of those who were present. The Silver Star's chief officer later described the faces of the dead as locked in terror. He used that word specifically, locked. As if the expression had set while they were still alive, and whatever had caused it had not released them when they died. There was also, several members of the boarding party later noted independently, a cold. A cold that had no source. The ambient temperature in the Strait of Malacca in February sits between 28 and 32 degrees Celsius. The deck of the ship should have been hot. The interiors should have been warmer still. They were not. The decision was made to tow the Ourang Medan to the nearest port. The Silver Star's crew attached a tow line. Some of the boarding party returned to the American ship. A small team remained aboard the Ourang Medan to manage the tow. Smoke began rising from below decks before the tow line was fully secure. The fire that started in the cargo hold of the Ourang Medan spread faster than any of the men present could account for afterward. There was no gradual escalation, no early stage where intervention might have been possible. The smoke was followed almost immediately by flame, and the flame moved with a speed and intensity that suggested either an accelerant or a fuel source of unusual volatility. The men still aboard the Ourang Medan were evacuated. The tow line was cut. Every person who had stepped onto that ship was back on the Silver Star when the explosion came. The Ourang Medan did not sink slowly. The explosion tore through the hull with enough force to lift the ship partially from the water. It went down fast. By the time the smoke cleared, there was nothing on the surface to mark where it had been. No bodies recovered. No cargo recovered. No manifest. No evidence. The investigation that followed was limited by the absence of everything an investigation requires. There was no wreck to examine. There were no bodies to autopsy. There was no cargo record that anyone was prepared to make available. The Silver Star filed an incident report. The city of Baltimore filed a corroborating report. Dutch maritime authorities, when contacted, were unable to locate comprehensive records for the Ourang Medan, though they confirmed the vessel's registration. Several theories have been advanced in the decades since. The most persistent concerns the cargo. Some researchers have argued that the Ourang Medan was carrying chemical agents or unstable materials left over from the war, Japanese stockpiles of chemical weapons that were being transported illegally, possibly to buyers in a region where post-war authority was still being negotiated. Potassium cyanide mixed with seawater can produce hydrogen cyanide gas. Nitroglycerine, improperly stored, can detonate from heat alone. Either substance, or a combination of similar materials, could explain the crew's deaths and the subsequent explosion. This theory accounts for the rapid fire and the explosion. It does not fully account for the expressions on the faces of the dead, which multiple witnesses described in terms that go beyond simple asphyxiation. Cyanide poisoning produces convulsions, loss of consciousness, and ultimately cardiac arrest. It does not typically produce the posture, arms extended, face upward, eyes open, that the boarding party described in terms that implied something seen rather than something suffered. A second theory concerns the possibility of carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty boiler, a gradual accumulation of gas below decks that worked its way up through the ship's ventilation. Carbon monoxide kills without physical warning, which would explain the lack of wounds and the distribution of bodies near their stations. But carbon monoxide poisoning produces a characteristic coloration of the skin, a cherry red flush, that none of the witnesses mentioned, and that a ship's doctor would have noted if present. A third theory, advanced in the 1950s, the Ourang Medan's registry entry, where it appears at all, ends in 1947 with a notation that translates roughly as lost at sea, cause undetermined. In the years since, the case has attracted the attention it tends to attract, researchers who argue for the chemical cargo theory, others who argue the entire event was fabricated, and a smaller number who have examined the witness accounts closely enough to note that the fabrication theory requires dismissing the independent, corroborating reports of multiple trained maritime officers who had no evident reason to invent what they described. The radio operator's final transmission was in Morse code. 2 words. In the original transmission log, reproduced in at least one account published in the 1950s, the signal was described as clean and deliberate. Not the frantic tapping of a man in panic, not the degraded signal of someone incapacitated. Clean. Deliberate. As if he knew what he was doing. As if he had the time and presence of mind to send exactly what he intended to send, and nothing more. I die. And then silence. Whatever he died of, he knew it was coming. Whatever he saw in those final moments, whatever expression settled onto his face and stayed there until the Silver Star's boarding party found him still at his station, he had enough time to mark it. To send 2 words into the air above the Strait of Malacca in February of 1947, where they were received by men who could not ignore them. The ship burned. The sea took it. The bodies went down with the wreck, or they were already gone before the fire started. The cold that the boarding party described dissipated, or they left it behind when they evacuated, or it was never there at all, which would require explaining why multiple men reported it independently in accounts that were not coordinated. The Strait of Malacca has been busy ever since. Thousands of vessels have passed through it in the decades since 1947. If there is a record somewhere in those waters of what passed through the Ourang Medan that February, it is a record that has not been translated into any language that survives. The radio operator knew something in those last seconds. Whatever moved through his ship that day, he was the last person to understand it, and the only account he left was 2 words. The sea offered nothing further.